name is Daniel Thompson, and I am very pleased to be here tonight. I'm a proud triple Eagle, Oxford, Emory, and Public Health. And I'm also a member of the CDC Employee Association of Emory Alumni. And so we'll talk more about that in a second. But I am currently the Communications and Partnership Specialist for an older adult falls prevention project at the CDC Division of Injury Prevention. I'm actually on loan from the CDC Foundation, so I'm kind of a contractor for CDC, from CDC Foundation. And tonight, the CDC EAEA and the Emory Atlanta Over 40 Network are thrilled to bring you this program. The CDC EAEA was formed to connect the significant amount of Emory alumni who are employed at CDC. Our membership stands at more than 1,500, and we host several events each year, such as this one, but also social events to allow Emory alumni who work at CDC an opportunity to connect with Emory. Because many of the Emory CDC employees went to Rollins, the CDC EAEA is housed within Rollins, but anyone who works at CDC can be a part of the CDC EAEA or CDC Foundation, whether it be a contractor or an FTE or a CDC Foundation employee. Just let Michelle, James, or I know if you'd like to receive emails about CDC EAEA events. So in the near term, we are planning a social hour to be held at the new Schoolhouse Brewery at Emory Point in the last 2 weeks of April. We would love for you to come out and socialize and unwind and maybe meet a fellow employee who you did not know was an Emory alum. So tonight we have partnered with the Emory Atlanta Over 40 Network to bring you what we hope will be important and timely information for navigating the professional world and what many have come to know as a hybrid workplace environment. We are very excited to have Mr. Brandon Smith here with us tonight from the Goizueta Business School to talk about two very important and impactful concepts: urgency in the workplace and how to lead and manage staff in the hybrid work environment. I'd like to take a moment to thank a few people who've made tonight possible. Certainly the CDC EAEA board for their insight and guidance and input into planning this event. Malia Hale, who couldn't be with us tonight, but she is a Rollins alumna and CDC EAEA board member. She also works in the Division of Healthcare Quality Promotion at NCEZID. Michael Young and Jamie Hogan Yarborough with Emory Atlanta Over 40 Network, and Roshan Ramlal in the OADC Office of the Director. They've been very helpful in planning this tonight. And of course, nothing would be possible for the alumni world at Rollins without Michelle James, our Senior Director. Thank you so much, Michelle, for all your hard work and supporting not only CDC EAEA, but everything else alumni related at Rollins, and probably things we don't even know about. Brandon Smith is an adjunct faculty member in the practice of management communication at Emory University's Goizueta Business School and author of The Hot Sauce Principle: How to Live and Lead in a World Where Everything is Urgent all of the time, and also the author of Author versus Editor. He's the founder of the website The Workplace Therapist, a resource dedicated to eliminating dysfunction at work, improving workplace health, and restoring a sense of optimism and hope. Sounds like an advertisement for the Carter Center. Are you the Carter Center? Gotcha. Brandon has consulted numerous Fortune 100 organizations and leading individuals and has been featured in MarketWatch, NASDAQ, and the Wall Street Journal. Drawing from his books, Brandon will talk tonight about the history of urgency in our culture and how things have changed over time. He'll discuss when urgency is necessary and how you can apply it in just the right amount to bring out the best in your work and home life. Brandon will also discuss maximizing and managing our time as leaders, including tips on team structure, time management, delegation, and importantly, boundaries. Please don't forget to stick around at the end for the raffle. If you did not fill out a Post-it note with your name to be entered in the raffle to receive a book, please do so. And so we are going to raffle off four books, two of each book to 4 winners tonight. And we are also recording this event, so we will be recording it and sharing it with the CDC EAEA listserv after the event tonight. So enough of me. Brandon, welcome. The floor is yours.
Daniel, thank you. Excellent. Well, really excited to be with you all here tonight, excited for our conversation here tonight, and I really want to frame it up that way. It's going to be a conversation, so we're a nice, intimate group. And what you're not going to get is just me talking at you for 45 minutes or an hour. Nobody wants that. It's supposed to be a networking event, so what we'll do is I'm going to share a little bit of content, and then I'm going to get you just talking either to the person next to you or at your table about what you see, how you see that playing out in your ecosystem and your sphere. And then we'll just have some great discussion, and then we'll go on and do it again. So it's really going to be more of a conversation over the next 45 minutes more than anything else. So at any point, feel comfortable to ask me a question about something that we haven't talked about that maybe is on your mind. I mean, there's a reason why each of you came here tonight, so I want to make sure I meet whatever needs you might have. We only have 45 minutes, and we're talking about the modern workplace, so hard to cover all that in 45 minutes, but I'm going to do my very best on a couple topics I think we're going to find particularly challenging here today. So as Daniel said, my name is Brandon Smith. I really wear a few hats in the world. One of my hats is I've historically taught at the business school. I'm an adjunct faculty member there. I teach in all the graduate MBA programs, everything around workplace and leadership communication. So essentially, helping people play nice in the sandbox is the stuff that I teach. And as you know, that's particularly, it's always been important, probably just as important today as it ever was. When I'm not doing that, the second hat that I wear in the world is I'm an executive coach. So that's probably 50% of my job is I work with individuals. So I'm also an alum of Goizueta. I also have a clinical therapy background, so it's my version of a Reese's peanut butter cup. Somehow it works. So a lot of the examples, stories I'm going to give you, I mean, this is stuff that I'm hearing from people every day, things that they're dealing with and wrestling with, whether they're in healthcare settings, higher education, corporate settings, nonprofit settings. It doesn't matter. A lot of this stuff's pretty universal. And then when I don't do that, I've also got a couple podcasts, the Workplace Therapist Show and the Leadership Foundry podcast, all about, again, putting content out to make our world a little bit easier. So hopefully you trust your bus driver enough to go on this journey with me. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I've got a few major objectives for us today. So we're going to talk about what are some of the most common workplace challenges today for leaders. I've got a couple that I'm going to share that seem to be the ones that pop up in all my conversations every single day. Okay? That doesn't mean they're the only ones. So that's why we're going to make this a conversation. But I'm going to share with you some of the more pressing ones. We're going to discuss practical ways to master urgency and sit in the right seats with our team. So particularly for those of you that are in people leadership roles and you've got folks that support you, we're going to talk about kind of how to even more effectively lead them, whether they're hybrid or in person, but either way, how do we do this a little bit better? And then with any kind of talk or conversation like this, you know, a really good outcome is for you to leave with just one idea, one concept, one practice you want to either start doing, stop doing, or continue doing starting tomorrow. That would be a really good use of the investment of your time here tonight, if you could leave with one thing. Now, naturally, I love this stuff. It's my life's vocation. But why would I want you to only leave with one thing? Why wouldn't I say, get your notepads out, you're going to leave with 20 things you're going to start doing tomorrow? What would happen if you did that? Fail, not overwhelmed. Probably do nothing, right? It's too much. Because the big thing we're going to start our conversation on today is my experience. This was true prior to the pandemic, and it's only gotten even more accelerated, is there's two factors for us in our professional lives that are at play. First, time is our most precious resource. It's not money, it's time. We've all felt that. That's changed in terms of how we look at that when we work remotely, and the pandemic's changed that, but time is still the big central thing. And second, everything feels urgent all the time. Do you all feel that in your workplaces? Where it feels like things are constantly urgent and pressing? Okay, so we're going to also talk about that dynamic and how we can start to overcome that a little bit. So to start us off, my first vignette topic here is going to be about urgency. We're going to talk about this idea that everything's urgent all the time. So some of you may have seen this before. This is it's the Eisenhower matrix. Also, Stephen Covey's made it famous. It's essentially this idea that you can make a 2x2 and put everything that comes your way into one of these quadrants. So just to orient you to what you're looking at here, our vertical axis here is importance. This goes from low importance to high importance, okay? And then our horizontal axis, it moves, it's urgency. And it goes from high urgency to low urgency, from left to right. So we've been naturally conditioned to always focus on the top right box. In this case, you want to focus on the top left box, the orange box. That's the stuff that is urgent and important. And you can see when you look at that box, we could call those crises, pressing issues. This is stuff that if I don't attend to this fairly rapidly, bad stuff's going to happen, okay? And so we would want to orient ourselves there first. Then we would move over to the right. We move to that yellow box. That's the stuff that is low urgency, but high importance. Okay, so it's stuff that we got to keep kind of top of mind, but doesn't necessarily mean it's pressing on us every day. And so if we look through the lens of leadership, it might be stuff like strategy or culture. Really important stuff, like our culture of our team and our environment, or the strategy, what we're trying to work on. Yeah, that's really important stuff. That stuff's never really urgent, but it's always important. So we'd want to orient ourselves there. And then the stuff in the green box and the blue box, I actually don't care what's in those boxes. Because whether we call them urgent or not, they're not important. This is all those spam emails that we get, or this is someone reaching out to us on LinkedIn trying to sell us something. I mean, this is that stuff we're constantly kind of peppered with. It's the spam phone calls on our phones. It's all that stuff, okay? And so in a perfect world, we'd either ignore that stuff, or it might be something that we can delegate to somebody else, okay? So in a perfect world, the way you'd use this 2x2 is something would come across your plate, either your plate or your team's plate, and you'd say, all right, where do we want to put this? And you'd put it in one of these boxes. But it's not a perfect world. Because we're moving at such a pace, we just tend to treat everything as if it's orange. That's the most common reaction I do, all the leaders I coach do, probably most of us in this room do. And if you're gut level honest with yourself, probably sometime this week, there's probably a real example of something that was a green or a blue, and you said, no, I got to respond real quickly because I want to get it out of my inbox. And you quickly responded, right? So we tend to operate at a pace that really is just not quite right. So let's go a little bit further down this path in this kind of history of urgency. So I'm going to take us down a little bit of a storyline here. This comes from a guy by the name of John Kotter. And if you haven't heard of John Kotter before, he's one of the pioneers in studying change management. So if you know much about change management or you've read anything around change management, John Kotter is one of the pioneers. He was a Harvard faculty member for many, many years, and this was what he researched on. And this is his 8-step model for leading change. So he says, if you're trying to get a group of people to change or a person to change, but really a group, this is how you want to do it. And he says the first thing you got to start off with is you have to create a sense of urgency. Now, when John Kotter started his research in the mid-'80s, that was a novel thing. There was a lot of organizations that moved at a pretty slow pace. People were used to working in the same place for 35 years, get their gold watch, retire. That was a pretty common thing. So he said, you got to increase the urgency. And then you can see it moves from there. Then he says, then you got to put together a powerful team to guide the transformation process. You got to create clear, simple, uplifting visions and strategies. And then you got to communicate, empower people by removing obstacles, create those short-term wins to provide momentum. And then we see urgency pop up again in stage 7. Maintain momentum by keeping urgency up and false pride down. And then make changes stick by nurturing a new culture. So you can see the whole idea, if we're trying to get people to change, this is a nice 8-step model. I like it because it's simple. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because urgency is in this thing twice. He says you got to create a high enough level of urgency to get people to change. And if we look at our own lives, that's probably very true. In the times when we've changed, whether we decide to change our health, or we decide to change our vocation, or even our commute, there was some pressing reason, right? We had some urgency that said, I got to make this change or bad stuff's going to happen. So I'm going to go down this story with just a little bit further. Some years previous, when he was making this model, John was interviewed. And the interview asked John Cotter, when change initiatives fail, why? And this is what he said. He said, well, it's managers under-communicate and often not by a small amount, or they send inconsistent messages. The net result is the same, a stalled transformation. So he's kind of re-emphasizing the point we know, communication's really, really important with our teams. You got to be communicating a lot. It's really important. Luckily, the interviewer didn't let him stop there, and the interviewer followed up and said, all right, John, I get it. Communication's important. But what do we really need to have to ensure change sticks? And he said there's really two things. These are the most critical ingredients. The urgency rate has to be high enough, and the message has to be simple and sticky enough. We won't talk a lot about simple, sticky messaging tonight, but I do want to talk about the urgency rate because it's so important. He says you got to have that. That's got to be high enough. All right, so I'm going to take off my facilitator or faculty hat for a minute, and I'm going to throw on my trusty therapist hat, okay? And I'm going to ask you all this question. And I want you to answer, okay? So feel free to answer out loud. When you feel urgency, what do you feel? What do you feel when you feel urgency? What's a feeling? What's a word? Anxiety? Anxiety? Yeah, what else? Adrenaline? Adrenaline? Yeah. Pressure? Yes. Flight? Yeah, flight? Yeah, I got out of here, yeah. Which is interesting because that's actually an action, but urgency in the right doses will stimulate action. So yeah, absolutely. Stress, excitement. We talked about adrenaline. It doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing. So is urgency a high energy emotion or a low energy emotion? High energy emotion, right? It's this vibrating thing in our chest, okay? And then when you feel urgent, and the clinical bucket for urgency, by the way, is anxiety, okay? And luckily there's a lot of medication out there for that, okay? So what we're actually talking about here, folks, is how to control the right amount of anxiety at work. That's really what we're talking about here. That's really what we're talking about. And anxiety at work is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we need anxiety to get a project done, or to do something that we've been putting off, or to make a big change. So, sometimes we need that, just like we do in our own life. But we also know if anxiety is always there all the time, we're going to be pretty overwhelmed. So what are some healthy ways you cope with urgency or anxiety at work? Or I'll put it up in a more specific example. Have any of you ever woken up in the middle of the night thinking about work? Yeah, a lot of us have, right? Okay, so what are the more healthier ways you've coped with that? So get up and just get it done. Yeah, so sometimes we just get up out of bed. It could be 3 a.m, but we just go and just knock some emails out, just get it out of our head. What else have you done that's worked? Google it? Yeah, so maybe just Google it, like do a little research so you're not kicking it around your head, right? Anything else? Make a list or make notes, right? Maybe either grab our phone and just record a note to ourselves or grab a little old school pad of paper and just write a couple thoughts down, right? Get out of our head, right? Which is great because used in the right doses, it stimulates action, which is important. That's what we're trying to do. So let's talk about that just a little bit more. So these are some points that came from the book I published in 2020, The Hot Sauce Principle: How to Live and Lead in a World Where Everything's Urgent All the Time. By the way, if you were curious, I would not recommend publishing a book during a pandemic. Probably not the best strategy. But these are a few really important points around urgency. So first, urgency is about intentionally creating a state of discomfort so that people are ready for change. Okay, so it's not necessarily a bad thing, bless you. It can be a good thing if we use it in the right ways. The messenger matters. The audience needs to trust the person creating urgency. So if we're putting urgency on another person, that person's got to trust us. We've got to make sure we built enough trust before we do this, because in that moment they're going to ask themselves, hey, do I trust this person enough to allow her or him to make me feel this way? And we need them to say yes. Okay. You can't have urgency without a time frame in which to take action, right? So we need a deadline. We can't say, hey, this project, it's pretty important. It's got to get done sometime. That's not really urgency. It's got to get done by end of day Friday, right? Or first thing tomorrow morning, or first thing at the end of the year. Urgency is like hot sauce. You only need a few drops. So this is the real center. If you have one of the takeaways today, I hope this is one of them, okay, that from now on, when you think of urgency, I don't want you to just think of urgency. I want you to think of a nice, big old bottle of hot sauce, because that is the best analogy for urgency. So I'm holding up a nice bottle of Tabasco. I actually happen to like hot sauce. And the reason why I like it is you can put hot sauce on things that are kind of bland. You can put it on rice. I put it on my eggs. Adds a little bit of flavor. Okay, makes it a priority. Gives it a little bit of focus. Right, gives a little kick. I love that. However, if everything coming out of our leadership kitchen is covered in this stuff, okay, so the appetizer you order just covered in hot sauce, salad doused in hot sauce, the entree swimming in hot sauce, dessert big pool of hot sauce. And the drink, just some hot sauce and some ice. Well, if you're like me, you're going to be curled up in a ball, begging for relief, and you're not going to be able to taste anything. And I think that's such an important reminder for us, because used in the right doses, this creates focus and priority. Overused, it creates chaos and confusion. So that's the real key when we're thinking about how we use this. And I'm going to talk about some strategies around it in a minute. And the right ratio is 10% urgency, 90% action plan. So if you're trying to get someone to change, whether it's a team member or a family member, or in my case, I've still got 2 teenagers at home, so I'm constantly figuring out ways to use hot sauce to get them to do the things they need to be doing, right? It's 10% urgency, 90% action plan. Just enough discomfort so people say, okay, I got it. What do I need to do to kind of make that happen? Okay, so let's build on that just a little bit, and then we're going to call our first little breakout for some conversation around this. See what you are seeing and feeling around this. So a few urgency warnings on how we properly need to do this and some ways we get stuck. So here's our first one. Being the hero encourages urgency and chaos. The hero trap is this will also come up in another topic I'm going to talk about here tonight. It's one of the big traps that is one of the ways we get in our own way. And I'm seeing it happen more and more today than any other time in the workplace, where we're swooping in and doing stuff, either of our teams or for other people, that we're doing just because we want to get it done and things feel urgent, but really we shouldn't be the ones doing it. And it's really resulting in longer hours, because we're doing not only our work, but other people's work too, right? Maybe you all feel that, but I see that all the time with my clients. So I did a session, a keynote in Las Vegas this year for a group of Napa Auto Care owners. So Napa is part of the Genuine Parts Company. This was about 15,000 independent auto care owners. So these are mechanics. These are folks that own auto shops, and they typically own 1 or 2. And you can see this quote here. It says, you've done all these jobs. They're easy for you and fun for you. You've gotten out of a mess a million times. You want to be and you like to be the hero. But if you want to truly move yourself to being a leader, you need to write a system so others can fix the problem. So sometimes when we swoop in and rescue people, it inadvertently creates more urgency, and it's not helping to grow the folks around us. Here's another different quote from a Napa Auto Care owner around our second warning. Unnecessary promises can sometimes create unnecessary urgency. And I'm guilty of this. I probably did it this week and didn't even realize it. But another kind of great example. So here's the quote. When something urgent comes up, pause for a moment before you speak and make promises. Sometimes we take something not urgent and make it urgent by overpromising. So example, in this case for one of these auto care owners, a customer comes in with a problem and you promise to have it done by the end of the day without ever asking, when do you need this by? Right? I've done this before. People say, well, Brandon, when can you get this to me? And I'll say, I can get to you by the end of the day. But had I just paused and said, when do you need this by? They'll say, I'm about to go on vacation. I need it in 2 weeks. Well, then why did I say by the end of it? Now I created urgency. And now if I don't deliver it by the end of the day, now I look bad, right? I made something not urgent, just because I'm trying to show that I'm on top of things, right? Rather than just pausing for a minute and saying, when do you need this by? Managing expectations and giving yourself time to respond is key to creating air in your calendar for the things that are truly urgent. So that's our second warning. So let me give you a couple strategies, and then we'll do a first little breakout conversation and see what we can learn from each other. For those of you that have a team, these are some ways that we can manage this a little more effectively with our team. So when I was researching for this book, I had a client of mine who was a small business owner. He had about 50-person company, and he was a really anxious guy just by nature. And so his team said, I really like him. He's a really good person, but he's driving us crazy. I mean, we're feeling overwhelmed and burned out because everything just feels urgent all the time. So I share with him this idea of hot sauce. After our meeting, on his own, I didn't tell him to do this. Brilliant idea, though. He goes to the grocery store, and he buys 3 bottles of hot sauce. Comes back into work the next day. He puts them on his desk. 1, 2, 3. And then whenever there was a new project or initiative that was truly urgent and important, when he assigned it to someone on his team, he would also hand them one of the bottles of hot sauce. And he'd say, this project is so important and urgent, you get one of these bottles. And it needs to sit on your desk until the project is done. Signaling to everybody else, you've got one of the big projects, so they can see it on your desk. And a reminder to you that you've got this. Now, first, wouldn't it be great if people could actually see all the bottles of hot sauce on our desk? They might not give us another one. They might let us pause for a moment when they see 15 bottles that are probably sitting on our desk right now. So I love that. But there was something even better. What do you think I loved even better than the fact he had the bottles? He only had 3. He could only make 3 things urgent and important at one time. Right now, we treat hot sauce bottles as if there's an infinite number. And so many organizations, leaders right now in particular, they just make everything urgent. Pat themselves on the back and say, I'm a great leader. You see it with Fortune 500 companies all the time, big institutions all the time. And they pat themselves and they say, I'm a good leader, I made urgency. And all they did was create chaos and confusion because they made too many things urgent. But 3 really made him focus. He had to think and say, is this so important it's worthy of one of my bottles? Because I've only got 3. And that's so important because partly our job as leaders is to create focus. So I love that. So that could be another way you think about this with your teams, is maybe limit the number of things you can create urgency around or assign, bottles to things. The last point around this, just if as individual contributors or just folks that are recipients of other people's urgency, these are some other ways to master this. Prioritize and force prioritization. So when someone brings you something and says this is urgent, don't just say yes. Pause for a minute and say, okay, I understand, yes, and I want to share with you all the things currently on my plate or my team's plate. Let's talk about where this needs to fit in. And if it needs to jump over another leader's priorities, I need your help communicating that with her or him. Are you willing to do that? And if they are, then that tells you it really is important. They're willing to put their neck out on the line and help talk to somebody else about it. Take and encourage vacations. So that's another way for us to take a pause from all the hot sauce in our life. We know this. Our own health is really important. Mental health is really important. Vacations are a way to do that. I've broken vacations loosely into 2 categories. Sabbatical, which is what we used to call vacations. That's when any vacation over a week, okay? We call that a sabbatical now, okay? 2 to 3 weeks going off somewhere. That's really great. Typically, if you're undergoing a lot of urgency, almost to where it's almost PTSD from a workplace standpoint, I often find my clients need a full week to unplug before they start to even feel normal. So a week vacation isn't going to be enough if you're really in that place. But the other way you can manage this is more of the interval training style, which is taking short vacations every quarter. So you wrap around a weekend. You take a Friday off, Monday off, Tuesday off. You end up with that kind of way to just decompress and rest. Utilize your out of office appropriately. Really basic, but it's something that most of my clients don't do enough of, is practice out of office. So when you are gone in meetings all day or you're traveling, turn your out of office on and let everybody know you're unavailable. Otherwise, you're just going to keep on pinging you. So you're going to land and you're going to get all these messages, okay? The other thing that's not on the slide, but I also practice, assuming you're using Microsoft Outlook as your primary tool, do not send emails on the weekends. Okay? I really hope you all hear that. For a lot of organizations, it's countercultural, but it's really unhealthy to be working 24/7. So I always use the scheduling function. I do the work. We all work on the weekends, okay? That's the reality. But schedule it to land on Monday morning. So then, when you're working on the weekends, you're actually getting ahead, and you're not starting an email tennis match, right? Where you send someone an email, they send you an email, now you're working, now you're playing tennis instead of catching up. Okay, so that's another great way to do it. And then lastly, consider utilizing an on-call methodology. In other words, if you're not available, make sure someone else can cover for you. And that can be even in your out of office. Okay. I published a second book. I published this one last year. The book is called The Author versus Editor Dilemma, The Leadership Secret to Unlocking Your Team, Your Time, and Your Impact. And I wrote the book because of all my coaching clients that are managing people, this was their number one challenge, number one problem, number one trap they were falling into. So I'll share the concept with you in short. So the idea behind it is really super simple concept, okay? I stumbled into it when I had a conversation with one client and it just worked. So whenever there's a leader and a direct report, in that dynamic, someone always has to sit in the author seat and someone always has to sit in the editor seat. And the key is knowing what seat to sit in when. So to cut to the chase, for those of you in the room that wear a manager role, you've got people that you lead and support, I would want you sitting in the editor seat with your team 80% of the time, and the author seat only 20%. And that makes perfect sense when you think about your all-time best team members or direct reports. Your all-time best team members or direct reports, they come to you and they say, hey, there's a problem or issue. Here's what I think we should do about it. I'd love to get your thoughts. They author a solution for you to edit. And your not so effective team members or direct reports, what do? They say, hey, there's a problem or issue. What do you want me to do about it? And as soon as they do that, they're now reeling you into that author seat, which takes a lot more time. So now either you're telling them what to do, or because everything's urgent all the time, see these books, they tie together, everything's urgent all the time, we say, don't worry about it, I'll just do it myself. You grab it and pretty soon you're doing it yourself. Okay? And then they get to sit in the editor seat, because both those seats have to be filled. So they can sit in the editor seat and say, well, it's not my fault it didn't work out. I'm just doing what she told me to do. Don't look at me. He just took it and did it. It's not my fault. So the key is kind of knowing what seat to sit in when. So let me just share a little bit more about the seats, and then we'll have a little conversation about this. Because if you can get the seats right, it's the secret to developing your team, and most importantly, making sure we're setting healthy boundaries, which is what this world's all about now, is healthy boundaries, and preserving our hours properly. If we don't get this right, our hours creep up in the 65, 70-hour mark. As an institution, Emory University is particularly bad about this. The clients I coach within Emory find themselves authoring when they should be editing. So it's a very big issue, at least within the university. So let's talk about the role of the editor. So when we are in the editor seat, these are the traits of the editor. So we're setting clear expectations. We're telling folks what we want to see. We're telling folks kind of the why and the what and the when, but we're not telling them the how. We're letting them kind of dictate the how. And they're going to bring us that, and we're going to coach them to develop their thinking, their approach to problem solving, and their work product. So they're bringing us something, and we're going to say, oh, I like this. Maybe you can get a little bit better at this. Okay? We don't solve the problem for the direct report. And then if we do this and do this consistently, it's the path to developing a high-performing team that can function without you, allowing you to work more on the business rather than in the business. That phrase comes from our friends in the entrepreneurial world, but it's a great way to think about our role as leaders. We want to spend more time on our work rather than in the work. Does that kind of make sense for folks in here? Right? Doing the stuff like getting above the trees and being able to do some of the planning versus constantly firefighting and reacting, which is the reality of most of our work, is firefighting. So that's the role of the editor. Now let's talk about the role of the author. So these are the characteristics of the author seat. So you have an author on your hands when you see these three main traits. They take ownership, they show initiative, and they display critical thinking. They take ownership, they show initiative, and they display critical thinking. These are the folks that we tap as high potentials. That if you want the simple back of the envelope definition of a high potential, there it is. She or he takes ownership, shows initiative, displays critical thinking. They present recommendations and a point of view to their manager to edit. They don't say, what do you want me to do? And then the folks that do this, again, they get promoted. They naturally get promoted. Okay. Now, a couple important points about this slide. First, I'm going to make a big assumption here, but I think I feel pretty comfortable doing it. Everyone in this room probably decided to come tonight and probably are in the roles that you're in because you're natural authors. You naturally take ownership, show initiative, display critical thinking. Okay? And that's a wonderful thing. I consider myself a natural author too. It's a great thing. The problem with natural authors is we tend to not know when not to author. Does that make sense? Everything that comes our way, we go, I can do that. I'll solve that. I'll fix that. I'll help with that. I mean, it's great. But then pretty soon we're doing stuff that other people should be doing. And they're like, oh, this is great. Just talk to her about it. She'll do it. You can drink coffee and watch her. Right? It's great. Okay? So that's the first one. The second point I'd want to make around this slide is in a perfect world, everybody should be authoring up and editing down. We author up, we edit down. Does that make sense? So while you're with your team, you want them authoring to you and you edit, we want to make sure we go to our leader and we author. We bring a point of view and recommendations. And when we do that, we're actually controlling the narrative. We're helping to focus them. Because instead of having if we use like a restaurant analogy, how many people here have ever been to a cheesecake factory? You ever been to a cheesecake factory? The menu's like a large book, right? It's like, oh, I'd like the thing on page 49, bottom of page, okay? That's not the kind of menu we want. When we do this, we can control the menu. We can say, Miss or Mr. Leader, you can choose from option A, option B, option C. What would you like? It allows us to focus them a little bit more, right? Which also helps reduce some of the unnecessary urgency, okay? So when I see this work well and everybody does what they're supposed to do, leaders typically work about 50, 55 hours a week. When the flow gets reversed and we author down and our team edits up, so they edit us, right? Leaders will approach 70, 75 hours really quickly. That's when we get burnout. So if you're having a time issue, you find yourself working crazy hours, and you have a team, think about this concept. This could be part of the reason why. You may be inadvertently authoring too much. Okay, so I did mention there's 20% of the time that we as leaders should be authoring. These are the two things that only we as leaders can author. Okay, our team looks to us to do this. And you can see even how this ties into the urgency concept. First, strategy/priorities. Our team looks to us to say, what am I supposed to work on this week? What's the stuff that's most important? And we can't say everything. Okay, we got to be able to say, here are the 3 to 5 things that are critical for you to focus your time and energy and resources on this week. They need us for that. That's part of the job of a leader's focus. The second primary job of a leader is, like we can call it culture, we could also call it alignment. It's getting everybody kind of operating the way that we want to have them operate. Like, what does it mean to be part of this team? And we're emphasizing those key cultural components. Like what's important to us, important to the team. So when we're doing our job right as leaders, we're spending more of our time on these things and less of our time doing the work. We're helping the team focus and creating that right culture. Make sense? Okay. There are 2 other ad hoc times when we might need to jump in and author. The first one is you hiring someone brand new. They've never worked at your organization before. They've never been at the CDC, or they've never been at Emory, or they've never been wherever you might happen to work. And this is a way for them to kind of, you help onboard them. So you need to maybe spend some time co-authoring with them before you're ready to let go of the reins and say, go author. And then the second one would be a really significant emergency. Not like your run-of-the-mill emergencies, but like the stuff that's so weird and rare, no one's ever seen it before. Like a global pandemic, for example, when we all might need to roll up our sleeves and do a little co-authoring, right? Like our team comes to us and says, no, really, I've never seen this before, or could really use your expertise and wisdom. Then we jump in. But we often get seduced by even the smallest little fire and jump in when maybe we don't need to. Okay, so a few warnings on this one, and then we'll do another little breakout, have some conversation, and I'll wrap up my time with you all here tonight. So here's our first warning. Our first warning is the hero trap. Once again, Our hero trap is one of the big ways that we inadvertently create more urgency and stress on ourselves. So you can see, as a manager, it's tempting to be the hero and rescue your team when fires emerge. When we rescue our teams, we are stunting their growth and creating a codependent relationship. So my therapist alarms are going off because that's exactly what we're doing. Right? The person just knows all they got to do is say, oh, I can't do it. Then you go, oh, I'll do it for you, right? Well, I can't. And then we do it again, right? We've created this dynamic now. So pro tip, next time you're asked to rescue the team, consider the following. Is there another member of the team that could solve the problem? Or consider encouraging members of the team to identify solutions on their own. So getting them to kind of jump in a little bit there and solve for that. Here's our second one. Avoid the fear of failure or loss of control trap. For some managers, letting their direct reports author can feel like a loss of control. So recognizing that growth comes from failure and that there are more than one way to solve a problem can help you overcome this trap. So the pro tip here is remind yourself that there are many ways to effectively solve a problem beyond just your own. Focus more on the results than the process to get there. And so this trap is a little more common with our friends that live in worlds that have a little more regulatory and compliance. Okay? Accounting, finance, legal, certain forms of healthcare compliance where there can be absolutely a right and wrong way. But if we're not in a world that has that kind of constraint around it, try and give some freedom for others to create that recipe. Because if we're dictating to our teams the why, the what, the when, and the how, we've just stripped them of ownership, initiative, and critical thinking. We're not even letting them do those things. We're just saying, no, don't think, just cook my recipe, which is not the path to developing the team that we want, because we want a team that operates so well, it allows us to do other things, and maybe even get promoted to do other things. And then, of course, we need someone to step into our seat. Well, if we're dictating the how, we can't do that. Here is our last warning. So I work with my clients one-on-one on putting this in place with their teams. So let's say you got 5 folks on your team. If you introduce this concept, it's a really simple, sticky concept. 2 people are going to step up right away and be like, I love this. This is great. I get to bring you ideas. I've got a lot of them. I can't wait. Doesn't mean their ideas are going to be great out of the gate, but they're going to embrace it. 2 folks are going to come along a little more slowly. And odds are you're going to have, typically 20%, you're going to have that one person that does not like to author. Because you'll see on the slide behind me, to author is to be vulnerable. To author is to be vulnerable. So they don't want to author to you because what if you think their idea is horrible? Or what if you ask yourself, why are they in this role? Right? It's that kind of the imposter syndrome, right? And so if you'll have one of those individuals when they keep trying to flip the seats back, and they'll use any of these phrases to get you back in that author seat. And so they'll do things like, well, what exactly do you want me to do? How would you approach this if you were me? I don't want to disappoint you. Can you tell me exactly what you want? I'm confused. Or I don't think I can do this without your help. So any or all those phrases can be used in order to flip the seats back to get you then taking that bait and then telling them what to do. Okay. So if you hear any of these phrases, the counsel I typically give is pause for a moment and say, I've got some thoughts, but before I share my thoughts, why don't you go back to your desk or let's end this meeting, think about how you would approach this, and then let's have another call tomorrow and let's talk about it. Force them to bring you something. You'll get the seats right when your direct reports are always bringing you something to react to. So if you've got direct reports, for those of you in the room, in your one-on-ones, you're on the right path. If every single meeting with a direct report, they come with something in their hands for you to react to. The minute they come empty-handed and say, what do you want me to talk about? You're authoring. And now all of a sudden it's going to take more of your time, and you're the one who's taking the ownership, initiative, and critical thinking, and not them. Okay, let's see here. So a few other applications of author editor, and then we'll do a little conversation around this. So this is a vertical tool. You can't really use it very cleanly with peers we can talk about how to improvise it for that, but any vertical relationship author-editor can help you solve for it. So the first one would be naturally a service provider and a client. So for those of you that have either been in a role or are in a role where maybe you're a consultant or you're supporting somebody in that kind of way, we naturally know to do this. And we always go to that client and we say, here's what's going on, here's some recommendations, would love to get your thoughts, right? It's kind of client management 101, okay? Which is a nice takeaway. How can we use this even in other environments? Like, for example, presenting to senior leaders. Whenever you're presenting to senior leaders, always want to author up. So not only share a point of view of what you're seeing in your part of the organization, but also recommendations. Always want to be doing that. Great way to kind of guide that discussion. And since this is also a vertical relationship, anyone in this room who's either embarked on or chooses to embark on the role of parenting one day, author-editor applies there too. So if the goal is to raise a fully formed human adult who is not living in your basement when they graduate from college, okay, then the parents that are the most successful around that, sometime around the teen years, they shift from authoring everything in their kiddo's life to moving in more into editor role. And they have their kids take on more ownership and initiative, like doing their own laundry, making their own lunches for school, choosing their extracurriculars they're no longer going to do, even though they've been doing them since 4, and then choosing another one, getting a job. By the way, in the mid-1990s, 70% of high schoolers had a job in the United States. Today, that number's 30%. Okay? So, and there's going to be lots of tears. There's going to be ruined clothes. There's going to be mistakes made. But they're going to learn resilience. They're going to learn ownership, initiative, and critical thinking. And by the time they're 23, they're ready to go. Now, the parents that really grip that steering wheel tight and want to control everything down to the minute to get their kids into the very best college and university, which is very admirable, will end up with kiddos at 23 not quite ready for prime time. They're going to need a few more years of seasoning in your basement until they're ready to go. Okay? So I make that funny analogy, but it's all about developing the people around us and honoring our hourly rate. Okay? Think about when your kids start to become teenagers, if you haven't already done that, you shouldn't be spending time doing their laundry. You should be spending time on things that only you can be doing. They're old enough to do their own. And the same thing with our team. Make sense? Okay. So again, simple concept, and yet we're all guilty of falling into author roles when maybe we shouldn't. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Same kind of thing. Have a little conversation at your table about that idea of author-editor. Do you see it pop up in your world? If so, what does it look like? How might you get a little better handle on it? So what's your reaction to the author-editor concept? And then what are the challenges that you face in shifting from being an author with your team to an editor? So just in kind of full fun transparency, I do now when I'm at the business school, a lot of the work I do is with exec ed. So if you don't know how the business school works, we have our programs, our degreed programs, and then exec ed is what we do. It's one of the few ways that most schools in the university don't make any money. The business school does and the medical school does because they offer other services. And one of the ways the business school does is they do custom programs with companies. A company will sign up to do a big engagement with cohorts and take them through programs. And I do a lot of work in those programs. One of our clients is UPS. And when I was sharing this concept with a bunch of UPS leaders, they all said the same thing. They said, concept makes perfect sense. We're all guilty of it. It's UPS. They're very hands-on, logistical. They default to authoring all the time. They said the trick is, and the problem is, execution. Execution is where it gets really, really tricky. So I'm curious where and how execution might get in your way. Maybe you don't have enough team members. Maybe you don't have team members that are skilled enough to author. Or maybe you just like to jump in and be the hero. Right? Okay, so with all these sessions, I always like to end the same way. Just like I mentioned before, my challenge to you, just make a mental note, write it down somewhere. What's that one thing you either want to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing? Based on what we chatted about here tonight. Maybe it was something I said that sparked something for you. Maybe it was something that the person you turned to said to you, and you went, okay, I got it. I need to work on that. Right? But what's that one takeaway that you don't want to lose? Something you either want to start doing, stop doing, or continue doing. Okay. Thank you all for letting me spend time with you all here tonight. I really appreciate it.